While chasing his dog, Tomoki comes across Yuichi, a young swimmer standing on the edge of the platform which seems to him like a concrete dragon. He assumes that the view from the summit might scare the boy. However, the young man dives without a moment's hesitation, leaving Tomoki in awe. After exiting the pool, Yuichi sees a spark in Tomoki's eyes that tells him he's interested in diving. He invites him to practice at the Mizuki Diving Club from that day onward, claiming that Tomoki can become a world-class diver. Years later, Yuichi competes in a tournament and reaches the final round. As Yuichi prepares for the final dive, the commentators reveal that he is the top diver in his age with the potential of a strong career ahead. Ultimately, Yuichi earns 420 points with his final dive and wins first place. Tomoki, who watched the competition, goes to the back to congratulate him. He excitingly describes how awesome Yuichi's flip during the dive and hopes to achieve the same level. The champion validates his feelings and dreams, saying that one day Tomoki will also stand on the platform. To fulfill his dream, Tomoki practices at the Mizuki Diving Club every day after school. His determination in the sport makes the other boys in class think that he's courageous to dive from heights. However, Tomoki tells them he gets scared looking down at the water, but leaps forward. Suddenly, Miu eavesdrops and asks Tomoki to walk home together, making his friends think Tomoki is lying about practice. Yet, truth be told, Miu walks with him in the opposite direction to her house just to spend some time together. Once they start walking, Miu talks about her favorite cooking show on a local news channel and how they made pancakes that look appealing. She mentions her favorite toppings, but Tomoki seems lost in thought. The question about being afraid can't leave his head. Still, Tomoki doesn't fear diving from the dragon but the pain from failure. He doesn't want to stand alone on the platform without any support. At that moment, Miu brings him back to Earth and asks if he liked any of the pancake toppings. Naturally, Tomoki picks a random topping for pancakes, but it wasn't in her list. She had assumed he wasn't listening but criticized him for it. Yet, Tomoki ignores her once he sees Yuichi walk inside the club. Putting that aside, Miu shows interest in seeing him dive. However, Tomoki refuses to let her stay, fearing she might dump him for Yuichi. Inside the club, Yuichi begins practice with his father and coach Fujitani, a world-renowned former Olympic diver. Despite his son possessing a natural talent for diving, Fujitani doesn't cut him any slack. He notices that his shoulders and toes are too stiff, causing unnecessary resistance when hitting the water. On the other side, Coach Chikara coaches the elementary students, including Tomoki. He is the first to climb the platform, but his confidence shatters at the summit, making him freeze. After a few minutes, his friends Ryuji and Ryu snap him out of it. Still, Tomoki stands still, refusing to take action. Eventually, their coach tells them to move up to the 5-meter platform. This is when Tomoki confesses that he doesn't want to be alone and dives successfully. While taking a bath, the two friends reveal that coaches are leaving the Mizuki Club after its founder Mizuki passed away earlier this year. However, Yuichi told them he would make a name for himself and ask the parent company to fund the club. Not only that, he has to keep his parents' legacy alive by becoming their successor in the diving world. Hearing about Yuichi's responsibilities increases their admiration and respect for him. Aside from that, it reminds Tomoki of the time Yuichi practiced with him. That day, everyone was off due to the rain. However, Tomoki wanted to practice, ensuring he didn't fall behind. Yuichi asks if he loves practicing that much, but Tomoki only hates diving alone from the beginner platform. From that day onward, Yuichi spent a couple of hours daily, teaching him how to dive from the tallest platform. Initially, Tomoki closes his eyes before hitting the water, but Yuichi advises him to open them. However, keeping his eyes on the water disrupts his speed and timing of the jump. Still, Yuichi tells him to keep on trying, otherwise he won't ever achieve his dream. Eventually, after days of practice, Tomoki finally lands the perfect dive. Despite being shocked, Yuichi tells Tomoki that he has the potential to be a great diver one day. Back in the present, Sakin gathers everyone in the dressing room to inform them about a scandal happening under their nose. He claims that Coach Fujitani is dating a woman perfect enough to get invited to the Plug podcast. Naturally, the boys are shocked to hear their coach is a Hub fan on the side. However, one of the boys confirms that he's seen the woman arrive from the parent company Mizuki. They believe that she's here to shut down the club for good. Suddenly, Yuichi enters the dressing room and asks Tomoki about the girl he was with that afternoon. He gets everybody's mind off the club shutting down and focuses on Tomoki's relationship status. Luckily, he manages to dial things down, claiming that Miu is just his friend. However, on his way back, Tomoki recalls the day Miu confessed her love and wonders why he said yes. As things stand, he doesn't even know what going out means. Yet, he was afraid of making her cry. Once he returns home, his younger brother starts yelling at him for not answering Miu's calls. Tomoki shuts him down and tells him to mind his own business. The following morning, Tomoki keeps his distance from Miu at school and runs to the club afterward. There, he sees Kyoko talking to Coach Fujitani about the club's potential. As everyone gathers around, Tomoki dares to ask if she is here to close their club. However, Kyoko ignores the question and asks if they are ready for the Tokyo Olympics. Naturally, Yuichi says that he is ready for the challenge. However, no one expected Tomoki to speak up and say that he wants to compete on the world stage alongside Yuichi. After receiving the news, Yuichi begins practicing his ripple dives, a basic technique to improve form. Seeing him work tirelessly reminds Tomoki of Kyoko's words. She told the boys that the club will close unless one of them makes it to the Tokyo Olympics. Tomoki never thought about participating in any tournaments, let alone the Olympics. However, the thought excited him, which is why he spoke up and wished to participate. Still, before letting them dream about winning, Kyoko asks the boys to show her their dives. One by one, all the boys step on the diving board, but the new coach tells them to come down right after. Kyoko claims she's seen everything and no longer requires them to dive. As they come down, she reveals that divers with a horrible standing posture will never do a successful dive. She makes everyone stand in the heat for hours until they loosen their neck, arms, and fingers to shift their center of gravity. On top of that, she forces them to tighten their lower bodies, ensuring all of their energy is gathered in the abdomen. During this process, Tomoki explains that a diver earns points when he enters the water without a splash. Ultimately, they aim to spread their energy evenly throughout the body and enter the pool like a cucumber. After hours of standing around, Kyoko finally lets the boys take a rest and ease their muscles in the bath. Ryuji and Ryu about her being strict to make herself look good. However, Yoichi reveals that her teaching methods resemble an American coach Yuichi learned under. Throughout his training, the coach focused on improving their posture over diving techniques, frustrating Yuichi just like how they are now. Yet, once his training was complete, Yuichi could sense a difference of day and night in his dives. Later on, he discovered that one of the coach's students won a gold medal for America. After the short break, Kyoko teaches the kids about handstands and how it's the most hated part of diving. Still, the only way to master handstands is by practice. So every day before leaving the club, all students will be forced to do handstands. Since most divers hate practicing it, they will have an edge over their opponents. Despite Kyoko's attention to detail, Ryuji and Ryu complain about their training. They head down to the lobby, but Tomoki is asked to stay. She reveals that Tomoki is double-jointed, which means he has increased flexibility. In short, he can definitely improve over time. The only catch is that he has to put in the effort. At first, Tomoki was caught up in the moment, but now he is dead serious about entering the Olympics. Still, Kyoko advises him to dream of becoming the best in the world, as God gave a body perfect for diving. Right before everyone prepares to leave, Kyoko hands out training regimens to improve their durability and overall strength. Ryuji and Ryu argue that off-club training is voluntary and emphasize that they regularly do it. However, their new coach doesn't believe that Japanese kids can do anything on their own. On top of that, she will go on a business trip and hopes the boys will follow their training program down the full stop. As per the documents, Tomoki begins the next day with a 1-hour jog with his dog to increase his stamina for long competitions. After coming back home, he removes his socks and starts doing push-ups. The goal of his training is to improve his mental sharpness, as Kyoko suggested that diving is a mental competition. Once everything is complete, Tomoki takes a shower and calls it a day after checking his body alignment in the mirror. During this time, he receives a call for his classmates, asking if he wants to hang out after school. Although Tomoki is tempted, he remembers that he needs to train after school to increase his aura. Still, as a teenager, Tomoki tries to tell his friends that he can hang out with someone else, but they hang up the phone. That's when he learns that becoming exceptional means being alone. On the other hand, Kyoko goes on a hunt to recruit the grandson of a famous diver named Akitsu. After some time, she finds him diving in the ocean with a perfect form. However, Shabuki fears stepping on the platform and diving in the pool. Something happened with his grandfather when he first came to Tokyo, and he thinks he might ruin his grandfather's reputation even further. Unexpectedly, Kyoko claims that his grandfather's career wasn't shameful. Aside from that, he left him something invaluable before dying. But before revealing the surprise, Kyoko wants him to fulfill her grandfather's wishes. Meanwhile, back at the club, the scandalous Sakin reveals that Kyoko is the granddaughter of the club's founder. She started diving at 8 under the tutelage of prestigious coaches in America. However, she took a break from diving after coming to Japan, and then later went back to America to become a diving coach. Yuichi completes the background story, revealing she abandoned her career to save their club from shutting down. At that moment, Ryuji and Ryu realize they are serious about participating in the Olympics. With only 18 months until the competition, they think they can't reach that level. Yuichi explains that these words would be true if this was any other sport. In diving, there are only a few names worth nothing. The rest of them are useless. To change the topic, Ryu suggests they should grab food after the club, but Tomoki the party pooper reminds them they need to focus on individual training. At first, the two of them thought that Tomoki was joking about training every day. However, hearing him follow the region without a break motivates them to train as well. After a few days, Kyoko returns to the club and introduces everyone to Shabuki. She also asks the boys if they followed their training. Naturally, all of them act like they followed it thoroughly, but instead of arguing, Kyoko decides to assess them herself. In the meantime, Yuichi tells Shabuki to step on the platform and dive. He wants to see if the legendary Akitsu's grandson can outshine him. After climbing the platform, Shabuki jumps high in the air and rolls inward. Unfortunately, he gets 0 points for splashing the water on entry. After the rough dive, Shabuki exits the pool with complaints about the height of the platform being too low, the water being too shallow, and tasting like chemicals. Still, Yuichi admires his dynamic style of driving. However, he tells Shabuki that he won't win with an unpolished dive. Unexpectedly, Shabuki thinks that performing and winning at the tournament won't satisfy him. However, Yuichi ignores him and steps onto the platform to show a perfect dive. Despite being perfect, Shabuki thinks his dive was boring and doesn't show interest in learning the technique. Meanwhile, Tomoki, who is still unsure of his talents, envies Yuichi for his elegant dives and Shabuki's dynamic style. Still, he climbs the platform and dives regardless of talent, believing his hard work will pay off. During the dive, Tomoki realizes his pace is too slow and enters the water without a second flip. After exiting the pool, Kyoko asks him why he hesitated midway. Like always, Tomoki tries to get himself out of the explanation. However, Kyoko forces him to speak up. Once that happens, Tomoki reveals that he couldn't see the platform after the first flip, indicating his speed was too slow. Kyoko is internally shocked by this revelation but calmly tells him to try again. This time, Tomoki does 2 flips in the air and enters the water perfectly. He also tells Kyoko that he was able to see the platform during the dive, which meant his speed was perfect. Later in the afternoon, everyone gathers in the classroom to hear the coaches brief on their situation. Surprisingly, Kyoko reveals she wants them to qualify for a training camp that trains Olympic athletes. In fact, qualifying for the training camp is the only potential option for participating in the upcoming Olympics. For that to happen, Kyoko advises Tomoki to add 3.5 flips to her dive. But everyone, including Yuichi, knows that executing those moves won't be easy for a high schooler. Concurrently, Tomoki argues with the same objection, but the coach says that it's their last resort. She promises that the judges will notice his moves and it will affect his overall scores. Just the thought of diving in front of an audience and messing up scares Tomoki. Despite this, he promises Kyoko to practice hard and master the dive before the training camp qualifying rounds. Meanwhile, this entire time, Yuichi keeps a smug look on his face and claims that Kyoko only cares about the club and her grandfather. Instead of refuting his claims, she agrees but then turns the tables on Yuichi, asking him about his motivations. As usual, he says all his efforts are for his own sake. Kyoko agrees and tells him that the glory of winning will be his despite her or anyone's feelings for that matter. So in the end, he should ignore everyone and focus on training. Strangely, her words remind him of the day he fell from the platform and hit his head. After recovering for a few days, his dad came to his room and sat distantly on his bed. He reminded him that everyone at the club looked up to him, and how they are scared to jump after his accident. Ultimately, Yuichi, despite feeling fear, had to come back to practice to show his fellow club mates that everything was fine. Back in the present, Tomoki enthusiastically works hard and earns Kyoko's respect. Since he's one of the club's main leads, she teaches him multiple techniques, hoping he'll learn the 3.5 dive soon. Unfortunately, Ryuji and Ryu feel jealous of the attention he gets and leave the club without him. He even tries calling them after returning home, but both ignore his texts. Suddenly, Miu calls and helps him relieve his stress. Upon listening to his troubles with friends, Miu asks him to spend time with her tomorrow, claiming she can lift his mood or pants. Meanwhile, poor Shabuki is forced to stay with Chikara and listen to his breakup story. After 10 years of being alone, he developed a habit of talking about his food. though he tries to help Shabuki understand the art of diving. Yet, he thinks that it's boring, unlike diving into the ocean. Later that night, Shabuki goes outside the apartment and kills his boredom by venting his anger. The following morning, Miu takes Tomoki to the park for a picnic as planned. She also packs a bento with tons of different foods. She thinks he might want to engage in romance. However, Tomoki switches the topic, asking her if she ever feels trapped in a small world. To add context, he reveals that sometimes it feels like he's trapped in a small space. However, to him, diving is the way to break out of that space and watch the view from the top of the platform. At first, he thought it was a pipe dream, but then Kyoko validated his dreams, assuring him that he had talent for diving. While his words are aspirational, Miu still believes that Tomoki will break free from the small world and inspire them to do the same. From that day onward, he ignored Ryuji and Ryu to focus on his goal of qualifying in the tournament. Yet, even after days of practice, Tomoki can't perform the move. However, Kyoko thinks that his eyes will help him master the movie sooner or later. After exiting the pool, Tomoki watches Yuichi's perfect dives from the sidelines, but Shabuki tells him that he's nothing special. Despite their differences, the two also practice hard to secure their spot in the upcoming Olympics. Later in the evening, Yuichi bumps into his old rival Yamada, also known as Pinky, for wearing girly pants in public. He claims he's not the same diver as before and won't lose to Yuichi. However, the prodigy doesn't care about rivalry as he aims to win the Olympics to save the Mizuki Diving Club. During their next practice session, Kyoko reminds the boys that they will practice regularly during Golden Week. Ryuji and the others want to take a day off and rest, but Kyoko claims that this week is an opportunity to practice hard. On top of that, they will be conducting a combined practice with other clubs, hoping to fill their spot in the Olympics. Normally, Yuichi would be the only one attending the camp during Golden Week. However, this year everyone can join since the Mizuki Club is the host. Tomoki is excited about getting an opportunity to practice with the best divers in Japan. Yet, Ryuji and Ryu think they will just show off their skills and mock them for being inferior. Despite their limitations, Tomoki claims that practicing with the best will help them improve faster. However, Ryu believes they should have improved by now since they've been practicing with Yuichi for a long time. In the meantime, Yuichi and Shabuki focus on their dives. One has a graceful dive with a perfect entry, while the other can't live without splashing the water on the poolside. A few minutes later, Kyoko calls everyone to the poolside to meet with the divers from other clubs. After formal introductions, Kyoko asks Pinky to take the stand as he's confident that his abilities are superior to Yuichi's. While he climbs to the platform and performs a textbook dive, Yuichi tells Tomoki that Pinky has more talent than the existing #1 diver in Japan. Naturally, Tomoki can't refute Yuichi's praise, but still he can't understand why Pinky would choose to fight him despite having superior skills. Unexpectedly, Yuichi reveals that Pinky never defeated him in a competition. His nerves always got the better of him, causing him to freeze on the platform. As long as Pinky can't manage his nerves and look past his goal of surpassing Yuichi, he can't become a serious competitor. Up next is Fire Jiru, a diver known for biting more than he can chew. Jiru always chooses to perform incredible dives but always fails in the end. In every competition, he ends up with red skin, which is where his nickname came from. Last but not least, Matsuno stands on the platform for his dive. Yuichi says he doesn't stand out very much and is a boring diver. Finally, Tsuji, a former gymnast, shows everyone how he mixes two different sports to execute the perfect dives without rotation. Yuichi praises his skill and claims he might be a serious candidate for the Olympics. Later, while Kyoko guides the trainees to improve their posture and stance, Tsuji speaks with Yuichi, telling him how lucky they are to have a coach with an eye for detail. He also notices her excellent form and assumes Kyoko must be a successful diver in her days. A few minutes later, Shabuki is the first among the Mizuki boys to climb the platform to dive. As always, his dynamic form and unrivaled moves impress everyone watching. However, his entry is as bad as ever. Despite failing miserably, Jiru senses that Shabuki carries a sense of responsibility on his shoulders. He extends his hand to help him out of the pool and asks if he's trying to protect something or break free from it. Personally, he views driving as a means to escape his bubble, which is something in common with Tomoki. This is why they focus on bold moves rather than making a smooth entry. For a moment, Shabuki stands speechless, realizing Jiru read him like a book. However, the macho man who's secretly shy refuses to open up. Instead, he packs his stuff and decides to take the day off. Kyoko calls his bluff, claiming he is just afraid to dive in front of an audience. Yet, her comments have the opposite effect, as Shabuki gets defensive and says that diving does not matter. With the episode out of the way, Tomoki notices Pinky and Yuichi competing in one-hand push-ups. In that moment, Tsuji provides Tomoki with context, revealing they have been rivals since middle school. However, Pinky was never able to beat Yuichi in water or on land, hence he believed defeating him was more important than winning a competition. Although Yuichi is no better, as he never let Pinky win due to his perfectionist attitude. In the meantime, Ryuji approaches Matsuno and praises his perfect diving technique. He assumes that Ryuji is mocking his boring diving style, but in reality it's completely different. In truth, he admires Matsuno's perfect style, lacking any mistakes. Upon hearing his compliment, the boring diver reveals that he will always rank second to divers like Yuichi and Pinky. They aim to add bold moves into their dives while his style is about limiting mistakes. Ultimately, Kyoko asks Tomoki to climb the platform to perform a 3.5 flip. He leaps forward with confidence and determination to succeed, but in the end, fails at the last rotation. As her coach, Kyoko is proud that he's come this far. However, he needs to tighten his body to the fingertips and succeed before the Asian qualifiers. Though, the rest of the boys watching are impressed that a high schooler can almost perform the flip. The boys quickly realize that Tomoki has a real talent for diving, as they have never heard of someone in junior high trying to do such a difficult flip. Suddenly, Yuichi speaks his mind, claiming Tomoki has the potential to become a top diver. With his seal of approval, the rest of them start respecting him. After the training camp ends, Kyoko puts all of her focus in helping Tomoki master his dive. During this time, Ryuji and Ryu approach and ask her to teach them the flip as well. However, Kyoko claims it will be too difficult for them. Frustrated, the boys throw a tantrum in the dressing room about the coach showing favoritism to Tomoki. Matters worsen as Tomoki enters the room and tries to make conversation. He talks about practicing with the other students, further enraging Ryuji. Eventually, he loses his cool and tells Tomoki that athletes are selfish beings who only care about being number one, especially people like him who talk sweet and win at the end of every manga. As they storm off, Tomoki wonders why his friends are acting this way. He loves diving, but now his passion is starting to hurt him. In the following practice session, Kyoko rounds up the high schoolers and tells them that Coach Fujitani told her about their complaints about showing favoritism to one student. Instead of clarifying herself, Kyoko asks them to stop acting like horny children who want mommy's attention and pinpoint their concerns. Despite knowing his friends turned against him, Tomoki keeps calm and focuses on practice. Unfortunately, the entire situation shocked him, leading him to make unnecessary mistakes. Sometimes, Tomoki jumps too early without enough rotational motion or lacks the speed for the flips. Even after an entire day of practice, Tomoki fails to improve his technique as he starts to think that diving isn't fun anymore. Unbeknownst to him, Yuichi watches him struggle, realizing he needs to help him. Unexpectedly, the prodigy takes time off from his busy schedule to ask Tomoki to walk with him. To break the ice, Yuichi starts their conversation by acknowledging that Ryuji and Ryu are wrong. Still, he believes that the two of them will come around eventually. Be that as it may, Tomoki always thought that the three of them were special. They are probably the only 8th graders who know the pain of hitting the water. Yet in the end, they stabbed him in the back. After listening to him, Yuichi forces Tomoki to see things from a different perspective, claiming he's the one who's different from them. The fact of the matter is that Coach Kyoko took interest in him and not the other two. Suddenly, Yuichi senses that Tomoki might want to quit diving. That's when he tells him that inspiring 100,000 spectators is far superior to losing a couple of friends. Tomoki sees merit in Yuichi's words and decides to continue diving no matter the cost. Still, all things considered, Yuichi feels bad for forcing Tomoki to realize the harsh realities of athletes. So, he offers to buy him a meal to lift his mood. Upon seating, Yuichi shows Tomoki an old newspaper from the year 2010 which talks about Shabuki's father and grandfather's death. Unexpectedly, they died when a typhoon hit their small fishing boat. However, the worst part is that neither his grandfather nor his father had the chance to polish their diving skills and make a name for themselves. Once Tomoki understands Shabuki's situation, Yuichi asks if he holds a grudge against diving. In truth, he wants him to realize that quitting his passion won't make him better. At the end of their conversation, Tomoki understands there's no shame in winning even if people envy him for it. He carries this attitude in the dressing room and minds his own business. Surprisingly, Ryuji and Ryu realize their mistakes after Kyoko confronts them about their lack of discipline. She told them they had no right to demand specific instruction when they refuted the individual training reform. In the end, they accept the fact that their lack of discipline was the cause of their failure. After clearing the misunderstanding, they promise to practice tirelessly, accepting Tomoki as their worthy rival. From that day onward, Tomoki works tirelessly to improve his signature flips while the other boys work to better their forms. In the meantime, Shabuki continues entering the water without an angle, causing a big splash every time. Naturally, Kyoko tells him to learn the saving technique, a form that will reduce the splash by forming a right angle when entering the water. However, Shabuki is still hell-bent on following his grandfather and entering the water with a straight body. He claims that diving is about performing moves in the air, and not how they enter the water. Yet, Kyoko reminds him that an American diver inspired them to change this rule at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, which is why his grandfather couldn't win. Later that evening, Coach Fujitani advises Kyoko to avoid confronting Shabuki in front of the boys. Despite wanting to save the club with shortcuts, their main job as a coach is to teach their students what's best for them. He believes that Shabuki and the others have a long road ahead. In the meantime, Tomoki resumes his practice but can't fully get the final steps of the flip. Kyoko advises him to use his eyes and aim to perform the flip once. It will give him an idea of where to look when diving, making it easy to repeat. Over the weekend, Tomoki bids farewell to his parents for the weekend and focuses on his physical training regimen. During his jog in the morning, he unexpectedly runs into Shabuki trying to pass the time. As the two boys sit, they start talking about their reasons for diving. Unlike what Tomoki expected, Shabuki dives because he thinks that it's in his Akitsu blood. Their family tree includes a long line of fishermen who used to dive into the ocean to please the god of the sea. Although he doesn't believe in God, his grandfather still taught him how to dive. However, he feels suffocated by the poolside and doesn't care about the judges scoring his dive on his water entry. Tomoki believes that Shabuki's heart is the right place but thinks his grandfather wanted him to dive into a pool. On his first day at the pool, he noticed that Shabuki had the perfect body alignment and dives. However, the wild diver refuses to accept it as the truth. He knew his grandfather hated the pool more than anything else. Luckily, Tomoki calms him down, claiming he was just making an observation. He then confesses that he doesn't care about the judges or scoring points either. To him, diving is about breaking free and having a moment to shine. Before parting ways, Shabuki praises Tomoki for having a resilient mind and thinks will master the flip in no time. In the next practice session, Tomoki performs the perfect 3.5 dive and shocks everyone. He excitedly runs home to tell his little brother about his achievements, only to find Miu crying in his room. For a moment, Tomoki thinks Miu and Hiroya had some kids fight. However, his brother reveals that he's always had feelings for Miu, and now she cares more about him than Tomoki. Naturally, he can't believe that his younger brother would do something so awful. Yet, Hiroya puts all the blame on Tomoki for neglecting Miu's feelings. While Hiroya rushes after her, Tomoki feels despair like never before. He feels like someone threw him somewhere darker and deeper than the ocean. 2 weeks pass, but Tomoki can't forget about the incident with Miu and his brother. This affects his mental health and his body alignment on the platform. Not only that, he misses 2 weeks of physical training but keeps it a secret from Kyoko. Meanwhile, Ryuji and Ryu watch him struggle to repeat the 3.5 flip. Eventually, Kyoko catches a hint that something is wrong, so she visits him at the house only to find him sulking in bed. After listening to his sob story, Kyoko thinks that Tomoki is the biggest idiot after Romeo. However, he can't still wrap his head around the fact that his brother tapped his girlfriend. He also calls Kyoko a cold-hearted girl who spent her entire life focused on diving and never fell in love. A few moments later, Tomoki realizes he crossed the line and apologizes. But instead of pulling his tongue out, Kyoko agrees with his point of view. She spent her entire life practicing yet failed to reach the top, since America let men compete in women's sports. Still, she always had a keen observation when it came to finding flaws in her own or someone else's diving techniques. This pushed her to pursue coaching and came back to Japan to save her grandfather's dream from being destroyed. Initially, she hoped that Yuichi and Shabuki would be the one to achieve her dream. But then she found another boy with more unpolished talent than the other two. Not only that, Tomoki had diamond eyes, a rare ability that allowed him to lock targets during high-speed rotation. With exceptional physical properties, flexibility, and those infamous diamond eyes, she thought Tomoki would become a top-tier diver. However, after seeing him waste 2 weeks, she thinks her judgment was wrong. The night before the qualifying rounds, Chikara enters Shabuki's room only to find him lost in thought. Initially, he tries to hide his feelings, but Chikara shows him a copy of the newspaper narrating his grandfather's death. Ultimately, Shabuki reveals he was thinking about Tomoki's words from the other night about him knowing the basics of diving before coming to the gym. He can't believe his grandfather would want him to compete after everything that happened. To make things easier, Chikara talks to him as his roommate, claiming his grandfather taught him the basics and hoped he would avoid the same mistakes as his. On the morning of the big day, Kyoko anxiously searches for Tomoki around the club and finds him standing at the 5-meter platform. He tells her that the sight reminds him of when he was 8. At that time, the 10-meter platform seemed like a dragon to him, and he sacrifices a lot to defeat that dragon. From now on, he promises Kyoko not to envy his brother for living the life he could have had. Instead, he will focus on diving and break free from the tiny world. Once the competition begins, the commenters announce that Yuichi will be the first one to dive. While heading towards the platform, he finds Shabuki standing anxiously. Instead of trying to get his mind, he forces him to embrace his nerves and prove the world wrong. Naturally, Yuichi performs a textbook dive to take the lead. Next up, Pinky climbs the platform, and unlike before, he executes a dive to earn some hefty points. Unfortunately, the rest of the boys from the Mizuki Club and the joint training session didn't do really well. However, Tomoki performs a wonder flip dive to get his name on the leaderboard. While heading back to the dressing room, Yuichi whispers into Tomoki's ear, inviting him to the top of the world alongside him. Lastly, Shabuki steps on the platform, making everyone wonder which dynamic dive he will do to sweep the crowd off their feet. Unexpectedly, his nerves take the better of him and hence he dives like a normal person, but it still earns him second place. However, Kyoko yells at him afterward for killing his personality. She tells him to let himself enjoy the momentary thrill of diving in front of the crowd and let himself loose. As the second round begins, Yuichi raises the bar by earning 3 perfect scores from a ripple entry. Seeing him execute such a complex move makes Pinky lose his cool and mess up the dive. However, Tomoki matches the standards set by Yuichi, performing a 3.5 flip that leaves everyone in awe. Eventually, Shabuki gets his chance in the spotlight again. Yet instead of going for the conventional dive, he performs like he's going to dive into the ocean. Despite falling into 4th place, Shabuki feels the fire his grandfather must have felt while diving in front of a crowd. As the competition continues, Yuichi focuses on maintaining his lead. Shabuki enjoys the thrill of the moment. The other participants also perform well but can't hold a candle to the Mizuki Club. Once the competition ends, the commentators announce that Yuichi is the winner. Meanwhile, everyone praises Tomoki for placing 4th. However, he is frustrated after losing to Yuichi and the others. He tells Yuichi that he wants to win the tournament by leaving everyone in the dust. Tomoki and the others pack their stuff in the dressing room while coping with their loss. Out of everyone, Tomoki is the only one who remains calm, but Ryu is devastated after ranking last. Once the boys return home, Chikara insists on giving Shabuki a back massage. Unlike the other coaches, he can't help him with his training, so the least he can do is help Shabuki relieve his physical stress. As he lies down, Chikara reminds him that his back has been injured for almost 2 years. Unexpectedly, his grandfather knew that diving is stressful on a person's body. This is the reason he never allowed him to dive from taller heights. Chikara sides with his decision, claiming that his grandfather was thinking in the long term. However, now Shabuki must see a doctor if he wishes to compete in future competitions. After the committee selects their candidates for the Beijing camp, Kyoko, Fujitani, and Chikara gather everybody in class to reveal the results. But before that, Fujitani announces that only 3 males will attend the camp. Without a doubt, Yuichi is the first to be selected due to an anonymous vote. Matsuno, the so-called boring diver, is selected right after him. For the final candidate, Fujitani reveals that multiple coaches argued with each other. However, in the end, one Chinese coach chose Shabuki for his boldness. Unfortunately, after conversing back and forth, the 3 of them refused to let him attend the camp. Hence, the coaches choose Tomoki as Shabuki's replacement. As the news sinks in, Chikara tells Shabuki that the training camp is too dangerous for his back. He must stay behind and recover. While Yuichi asks him to shed more light on his injury, Tomoki bursts out in anger, saying he won't use Shabuki as a stepping stone to his success. Fujitani thinks Mr. Too Good for Comfort will become an obstacle for himself, but Kyoko assures him that he will attend the camp. In the meantime, he asks Fujitani and the others to give her a moment alone with Shabuki. While they talk, Fujitani tries to lift Ryoji's mood, saying he'll win next time. However, at this point, he thinks that playing a sport like volleyball or basketball where teams win or lose together might be more practical. On the other hand, Tomoki sulks over not being chosen before Shabuki. He believes his decision to prioritize diving over anything else has hurt his friends and family. It will also create bad breath between him and Shabuki. However, Yuichi shares a different perspective, claiming he's the only one capable of replacing Shabuki. Otherwise, the Chinese coaches would have chosen Pinky or Jiru. Yuichi says that Tomoki should drown himself in a nearby pond if he doesn't attend the camp. Meanwhile, inside the club, Kyoko apologizes to Shabuki for deciding without his consent. She had a hunch that Shabuki would fight to attend the training camp. Unfortunately, she can't endanger his career over a short trip to China. In the end, she allowed to let him loose in the competition so that he can experience the momentary thrill that athletes feel. Putting the training camp aside, Shabuki wants to know why Kyoko forced him to return and compete despite knowing about his injuries. But as things stand, she didn't know about his exact conditions. Yet, she still believes he can compete after finding a way around his injury. Later that evening, Shabuki drops by Tomoki's house and encounters his younger brother at the door. Shabuki knew that Tomoki would object to attending the camp. However, he reminds him that opportunities don't come knocking twice. Plus, he thinks the coaches saw hidden potential, hence they choose him as his replacement. Strangely, Tomoki confesses that Yuichi told him the same exact thing. On top of that, he is afraid that the committee might choose Pinky if Tomoki backed out. As they converse, Shabuki mentions that Tomoki has changed in these past months. Before he was shy and kept to himself. However, now there is a fire under his eyes to be the best diver in the world. Naturally, Tomoki gives this credit to his younger brother who stole his girl while he was too busy with diving. Despite not attending to Miu's needs, Tomoki was starting to fall in love, but things fell apart. In the end, Shabuki tells him to focus on his career as men like him rarely find true love. The very next morning, Tomoki arrives at the club to master his signature flip before the training camp begins. Fujitani compliments Kyoko for predicting that he'll return and agree to attend the club. She tells him that Tomoki isn't as weak as he looks. While on the other hand, Chikara wonders if Shabuki is putting on a brave face and hiding his pain. While everyone practices their dive, Ryuji informs Sakin that Ryu quit the club. He couldn't cope with the loss. Although, now that Ryu is gone, Ryuji worries that he'll have to fight with the others alone. That evening, Ryuji tries to convince Ryu to return to the club. However, he reveals that he's never had to practice hard before Kyoko showed up. Still, after seeing Tomoki and Ryuji improve, he decides to practice and follow his training regimen. Despite that, he didn't win or even ranked in the middle. He believes there's no point in striving for something that yields no results. Yet, in his heart, he will always root for Tomoki in hopes that he'll become the best in the world. On the other hand, Shabuki returns home only to listen to Chikara's local BBQ facts. In truth, he wants to avoid talking about his injury and diving. Although they are not family, Chikara considers Shabuki to be his son and advises him to visit a doctor. After a few days, Tomoki, Yuichi and Matsuno meet at the airport for their flight to Beijing. Meanwhile, Shabuki boards a train back to his city. While the boys train in China, Shabuki returns to his hometown to escape from the busy life of Tokyo. He stands at the edge of the cliff where his grandfather once taught him how to dive and remembers the good old days. Deep down, Shabuki feels like he's drowning in the ocean as his chronic back pain gets worse every time he dives. Eventually, he climbs back down only to find his lover Kyoko waiting for him. She assumes that both his grandfather and Shabuki quit diving due to their back pain. But in reality, his grandfather never told anyone about his reasons for quitting. Nonetheless, the fact is his grandfather is dead, and now it's up to Shabuki to decide his future. He claims he'll fish to earn a living and marry Kyoyuko, living their lives happily ever after. However, Kyoyuko thinks he is just lying to himself and the world. After spending some time alone, Shabuki gets his head and returns home only to find Yuichi and Tomoki munching on his doorstep. Turns out, the Chinese coaches took pity on their physical condition and gave them a 3-day vacation. Yet, Shabuki knows that their alibi is bullshit. Despite their internal matters, Shabuki and the boys pose as friends, telling Shabuki's family that he's in good hands. While eating, Shabuki's sisters ask Yuichi and Tomoki about their relationship with Shabuki. They also want to know the basics about diving and how it's scored. As things stand, Shabuki kept them away from the world of diving, fearing they might want to compete. The atmosphere soon changes, as the girls ask Tomoki about his love life. Being a teenager, he doesn't realize the meaning behind keeping shit to himself and so narrates his entire breakup story. Shabuki uses this opportunity to divert his sister's attention onto Yuichi's love life, which as you guessed is non-existent. The girls assume that Yuichi's girlfriend would be super cute or even an idol. Their excitement makes Tomoki and Shabuki laugh like children. While Yuichi gets embarrassed, Shabuki reveals that he never had a girlfriend. At that moment, Yuichi counters the insult, claiming that Shabuki is also single. Unfortunately, before he can finish his sentence, Kayuyuka barges inside, upset that her boyfriend didn't invite him. Later that night, Yuichi jumps on Shabuki, asking him where they first met and how far they have gone. While Shabuki tells him to ask one question at a time, Tomoki enters the room to ask if they will marry. As the conversation continues, Yuichi speaks about his humbling experience in Beijing. He struggled to keep up with the training regimen, but the divers there trained like it was second nature. Still, Tomoki thinks that his performance impressed the Chinese coach, and he invited him to move to China. However, Yuichi thinks more highly of Tomoki since he was able to keep up with the training without being exhausted. Upon hearing them talk about their experiences, Shabuki wonders what would have happened if he attended the camp. The following morning, Shabuki and Kayuyuko take the boys to the beach where the giants started diving. In their culture, boys dive at the age of 15 as a coming-of-age ceremony. However, his grandfather broke the record by 1 year. Naturally, Shabuki wanted to make his mark, and so he dove at 13 instead of the normal age. Not only that, he made a declaration on the cliff, challenging everyone who wants to steal Kayuyuko to dive from the cliff. As expected, no boy dared to jump off the cliff. However, she expects Yuichi and Tomoki to be the first ones to dive from 20 meters. Initially, Yuichi says that he has to avoid getting injured for the upcoming competition, otherwise the training camp would have been nothing. Still, his competitive spirit forces him to sprint and dive into the ocean. Soon, Tomoki follows suit, as he wants to surpass Yuichi in the future. Kayuyuko mocks Shabuki, saying he was cooler when they started dating. The strike to his honor forces him to forget about his back pain and dive. As night falls, Shibuki's sisters pull them into lighting fireworks with them. This is the first time that Yuichi, Tomoki, and Shabuki felt like spending time with each other as normal friends. However, deep down, Yuichi knows that it won't last forever. Before calling it a day, he and Shabuki talk privately about returning to the Mizuki Diving Club in Tokyo. Unfortunately, Shabuki doesn't know the answer to his questions. He has lost sight of his goals after Kyoko told him he can't represent Japan at the Olympics. Now, he doesn't know where to aim for. Unlike before, Yuichi walks a mile in Shibuki's shoes, understanding that this can happen to him someday. However, he can't force him to return to the club. All he asks is to call Coach Chikara since he was devastated after hearing about his decision. Aside from that, he gave a parcel to him from Kyoko, and said that he'd know what's inside after seeing it. Once Yuichi leaves, Shabuki opens a package only to find a long letter from Kyoko. Despite not wanting to force his decision, she writes about the time when her grandfather Mizuki first saw his grandfather Shiraha Akitsu dive into the ocean. He was star-tucked by his unpolished talent and wanted him to display it to the world. However, just like him, Shiraha initially refused his offer, claiming he doesn't want to dive in pools. He is meant to challenge oceans and not humans. Mizuki felt that Shiraha was afraid to face the world, and hence forced him to come out of his shell. With that, their relationship developed and they went to represent Japan in the 1964 Olympics. Shiraha's first dive caught the hearts of everyone watching. It was different from the rigged dives in Europe and the flexible dives of America. However, Mizuki didn't know that Shiraha had been diving in the ocean since childhood. The strain on his body manifested himself when he started his career, forcing him to retire early. Still, Shiraha wanted to allow his grandson the opportunity of feeling the same momentary thrill that he felt. And so, he recorded his legendary dive that felt like a swan to everyone watching. Hence, people of the diving world called it the Swan Dive. Watching his grandfather's dive reignites his passion for the sport, allowing him to return to MDC. Meanwhile, back in Tokyo, Fujitani tells Yuichi that he and his rival will be representing Japan, and the last spot will remain empty. He will keep the news from Tomoki and the others until the final announcement. Months before the Olympics, Yuichi begins learning new dives to increase his chances at winning a medal. However, his practice is interrupted by the Mizuki Federation. They invite him and Fujitani to offer him a sponsorship for an upcoming sports drink. Unexpectedly, they prepared for the infomercial beforehand, asking Yuichi to be the front cover for their brand. Additionally, they will produce custom swimsuits for everyone at the club if he manages to secure a medal. Naturally, Yuichi can't refuse the offer. Instead, he takes advantage of the moment to ask them to repair their club's dry mat. On their way back, Fujitani tells Yuichi that these things are normal food for the athlete. Yet, he is proud that he wanted to fix the club before anything else. Despite his praise, Yuichi gets infuriated that his father is still thinking of the club before his son. Back at the club, Fujitani announces that Japan's #1 diver Teramoto and #2 Yuichi will represent Japan at the Olympics. Ryuji and the others wonder why they are not filling the quota and sending 3 people instead of 2. Unexpectedly, he believes that increasing the number of representatives won't change their chances of securing a medal. This raises a question in Yuichi's mind, wondering why he was chosen if Japan wants to skim their numbers. He also wants to know if he got the infomercial because of his ticket to the Olympics. However, Fujitani shuts him down, claiming he saved the club from shutting down and nothing else matters. As Yuichi sits down, Fujitani advises the other boys to continue persevering and work to participate in the next Olympics. Ryuji speaks out loud, reminding everyone that 5 years is a long time. He doesn't even know what will happen in the next year. Once the meeting ends, Yoichi approaches Ryuji to ask him if he intends to quit the club like Ryu. For a moment, he is left speechless that the ever-cold Yuichi would ask him such a question. But after coming back to Earth, he advises him to worry about Tomoki instead of him. He has the best chance of making it to the next Olympics. However, the news of Yuichi and Teramoto broke him deep inside. Later that evening, Yuichi's mother cooks him a congratulatory meal for making it to the world stage. She is so proud that both her husband and son are now Olympic athletes. Still, something keeps Yuichi's mind away from the conversation. He enters his bedroom with a bad headache and decides to skip practice for the first time in his life. The following morning, Sakin spreads the news of Yuichi's cheat day throughout the club, although everyone thinks that he'll return tomorrow. Unexpectedly, an entire week passes but Yuichi doesn't show up to practice. During his vacation, Tomoki questions his place in the club and asks Shabuki about his reasons to come back. Despite not representing Japan, Shabuki has developed an interest in diving. That evening, Yuichi comes to seek advice from Shabuki on his mental issues. He confesses this hasn't happened to him before but not practicing has messed up his head. As usual, Shabuki doesn't know what to say or help Yuichi decide. Yet, he wants to compete with him on a stage even if it's not the Olympics. Upon returning home, he finds a bouquet of orchids from Tomoki inside his room. Yuichi calls him to say thank Ryu but the conversation shifts to his mental health. After looking up to him for 6 years, Tomoki can't digest that Yuichi is not practicing with them. However, Yuichi blames everything on the alignment of the stars to avoid speaking the truth. Once the call ends, Fujitani enters the room to set him straight. Despite being a father, he must fulfill his coaching duties and force Yuichi back into practice. Furthermore, he needs to get in shape for the upcoming Japan and China tournament in November. The Swimming Federation will use this moment to announce his and Teramoto's selection as representatives of Japan. Unlike before, Yuichi thinks he might make a mistake against a fellow Japanese diver, putting his spot in danger. However, Fujitani assures him that his spot is set in stone. Additionally, the Yuichi he knows doesn't make a mistake in an important competition. Following his father's advice, Yuichi comes to practice only to find Tomoki practicing a 4.5 flip. Kyoko instructs him to use his eyes to the fullest and adjust his body inward to increase his speed. Meanwhile, Chikara tells Yuichi that Shabuki is under electrotherapy and takes ballet lessons on the side. He can't wait to see a combination of Shabuki's dynamic style and graceful ballet. Eventually, Yuichi disregards everything and begins diving. Unfortunately, he can't hit the correct timing even after a few dives. Everyone watching is surprised as they have never seen him mess up. After failing the entire day, Yuichi gives up trying to find the answer himself and invites Kyoko for lunch. Being a coach, she doesn't have to count calories and eats good food, while Yuichi is stuck drinking iced coffee. As their conversation begins, Yuichi asks why she is teaching Tomoki and Shabuki when her goal of saving the club has been fulfilled. Unexpectedly, she wants to help them overcome their limits and participate in the next Olympics. She realized that a coach doesn't need a goal but hungry athletes. Once Yuichi opens up about his true feelings, Kyoko understands that Yuichi has been diving on a track set by others. The club wants him for their stupid commercial. His father wants him to dive for his legacy, and Kyoko wants him to save the club. In the end, she advises him to find his own reasons for diving and leaves. Yuichi rushes home to ask his father to arrange a meeting between him and the chairman of the Japanese Swimming Federation. Fujitani is taken aback by his behavior, as Yuichi never asked him for anything. Still, taking note of recent behavior, Fujitani feels something is off and refuses to let them meet. However, Yuichi insists that an Olympic athlete should be able to meet the chairman. On top of that, this is the first time he's ever asked him for a favor. During the morning, Ryuji and Tomoki enter the club only to find an American man trying to pick up their coach. Tomoki thinks he's here to convince her to create another account. However, Ryuji, who learned English watching Sins, translates their conversation, revealing the man is trying to recruit her to coach overseas. Hearing her say okay convinces Tomoki that she'll be leaving them. Despite being conflicted, he practices his flips for the competition. Once evening falls, Fujitani blows his whistle and calls it a day. Unexpectedly, Tomoki is lost in thought about Kyoko leaving them and suddenly falls from the platform. The scene reminds Yuichi of his fall, making him freeze. Luckily, Shabuki takes the initiative to drag Tomoki out of the water and call an ambulance. Everyone goes with Tomoki to the hospital, but Yuichi stays behind at the club and keeps watching the pool. At night, Fujitani returns to the club and asks him to come home. Instead of answering, Yuichi asks him about Tomoki and leaves. After a few days, Yuichi visits Tomoki's house with the same flowers he gave him. Unexpectedly, he finds Shabuki and the others present in his room, allowing them to talk about their recent situation. Shabuki can't believe that his rival Yuichi skipped practice for 2 weeks, and his other rival injured himself. After everyone leaves, Tomoki tells Yuichi that he was heartbroken when the officials announced the 2 individuals going to Olympics. All this time, he lived in a bubble of his own limits. Yet, these limits were set by other adults. First, it was the 3.5 flip, and then it was the Olympics. However, from now on, he wants to set his own limits. That is why he chose to practice the 4.5 flip. Unexpectedly, Yuichi opens up about his feelings. He first saw Tomoki and he was scared to jump. But soon, he started to catch up to him and pulled off an insane move that is impossible for a high schooler. On the other hand, Shabuki also proved himself by taking up ballet and accepting he won't participate in the Olympics. Deep down, he was afraid of not trying something new. However, Tomoki's change in mindset makes Yuichi realize that he was thinking about things the wrong way. All of this time he had dreamed of going to the Olympics, yet he can't feel anything when that thing becomes a reality. As he leaves, Yuichi picks up the flowers, saying the one and only prince of diving doesn't bring flowers to his enemies. He then declares that he'll be the #1 diver in the world and defeat Tomoki. Afterward, he goes straight to his father's room and asks about the meeting with the chairman. Fujitani reveals that the chairman agreed to meet with him. However, he won't allow it unless Yuichi tells him about his reasons. Despite being insisted, Yuichi refuses to reveal his reasons, knowing his father wouldn't agree with his decision. Fujitani tries to explain that doing something reckless would hurt MDC. Ultimately, Yuichi loses his shit over his father only caring about MDC. He claims that his father wants him to win the Olympics to make up for his failures. However, Yuichi makes it clear that it is his Olympic and Fujitani has nothing to do with it. On the other hand, Kyoko finds Tomoki outside the club after recovery. She thinks he's afraid of diving after his injury. But Tomoki mentions that Yuichi has booked a spot in the Olympics, meaning her goal at the club is complete. He feels sad that she might move on and leave them behind. Yet, instead of refuting his thoughts, Kyoko tells him that there is no us in diving. He must compete and win alone. A few days later, Yuichi meets with the chairman to ask him to revoke his spot in the Olympics. To make things worse, he will not participate in the Japan-China competition to make sure the federation can't force him. Unexpectedly, the chairman realizes that Yuichi feels that his spot at the competition was given to him by unfair means. He wants to compete in an Olympic trial to give everyone a decent chance. In the end, the chairman can't force him into doing anything. Yet, he reminds Yuichi that getting something back after throwing it is much more difficult. Only those who can score more than 430 points will book a spot at the Olympics. If there isn't anyone else aside from Teramoto, then they'll just take him to the Olympics. With that said, Tomoki and the others compete in the Japan-China competition. However, none of them except Teramoto managed to score higher than 430 points. As per the chairman's agreement with Yuichi, they will hold an Olympic trial and choose the other representatives. Later that evening, Yuichi crowned Tomoki the champion of stupidity. He would have earned 430 points with a 3.5. Yet, he got ahead of himself and tried to do a 4.5. Though, Shabuki thinks Yuichi is the bigger idiot for throwing away his spot for a fair trial. Still, Tomoki thinks he'll be the one to qualify for the world stage with his flips. However, Yuichi and Shabuki declare that they will stop him at all costs. In the end, they got back their own Olympic and can fight for it fairly. With his head back in the game, Yuichi invites Kyoko to an organic restaurant, so he can at least eat while talking. Firstly, he appreciates her effort in helping him get out of the slump. However, Kyoko thinks he would have managed that eventually on his own. Not only that, she is surprised by his decision to revoke his spot at the Olympics. Yet, it seems obvious to why Yuichi would do something like that. Coming to the topic, Yuichi asks Kyoko to teach him a 2.5 flip with a 2.5 pike. This move is one of the hardest moves to pull off, but Yuichi wants to make it his own like Tomoki and Shabuki. From that day onward, she teaches the basics of the move. However, Yuichi can't magically learn it overnight and has to fail in order to grow. While taking a few minutes off, Ryuji asks Yuichi if he heard about Kyoko leaving for America after the competition. The shock on his face tells Ryuji that he never knew. Still, he wants to focus on the competition and keep other matters on hold. At the end of the day, Tomoki heads back home only to find Ryu on his way. After talking about their lives, Ryu reveals he was avoiding this route because meeting him would be awkward. However, now he has joined the basketball club right beside MDC and is enjoying life. That aside, he heard from Ryuji that Kyoko is going to leave after this competition. Still, he thinks that meeting her was a privilege for everyone. If not for her, Ryuji wouldn't be playing basketball. Not only that, she helped Tomoki awaken his hidden talents and master a flip normally impossible for junior high schoolers. As they converse, Ryuji reminds Tomoki about the time Yuichi lent him a plain swimsuit right before a competition. It turns out, he was the one who hid Ryuji's swimsuit because it was more flashy than his lime yellow. So, he wants Tomoki to take revenge and win a spot at the Olympics. A day before the competition, Kyoko treats the boys to a half day at Kobe. Shabuki and Tomoki enjoy the local treats. However, Yuichi refuses to stuff his face right before an important competition. As things stand, he is the most likely to win the competition. However, Tomoki claims he will pull off a 4.5 flip and earn a spot in the Olympics. Naturally, Shabuki feels the same, but Chikara stops them before the fight escalates. At the end of the day, they check in a local hotel where they reunite with Ryuji and Saken. Turns out, Fujitani treated them to a nice dinner at a fancy restaurant to compensate for not taking them to Kobe. The boys have fun playing games and talking until Chikara tells Yuichi to meet his father. Strangely, his father asks Yuichi to teach him how to operate a camera. Eventually, Yuichi asks about his plans if MDC closes. With a regrettable voice, Fujitani reveals that he was offered a job in University of Otaru as a lecturer for international sports. If the club closes down, then he must take responsibility for his lack of ability to coach and never do it again. Yuichi is shocked that his father would give up being a diving coach after putting his entire life into it. Despite his feelings, Fujitani believes that his teaching style is outdated. Furthermore, he thinks that old people like him should fade away. The thought of ruining his father's career, having the club shut down, and not fulfilling the chairman's long-last dream of earning a medal runs rampant in Yuichi's mind. He goes to train in the pool to get his mind off a few things. However, exhausting his stamina right before the competition makes him feel like a dumbass. While going back to his room, Yuichi runs into Pinky, who calls him an idiot for revoking his spot at the Olympics. But instead of snappy comebacks, Yuichi confirms that his teammates said the same thing. Still, all Pinky cares about is winning at the Olympics. Hours before the competition, the boys reunite with each other, showcasing how they have grown throughout the year. Unexpectedly, Pinky finally realized that wearing pink won't make the judges like him. Now, the boys call him Camel Brown. Yet, his determination to win is no joke. As he declares himself the winner, Tomoki comes forward, saying he's the one going to the Olympics. On the other hand, Kyoko reminds Fujitani that he told her to focus on the boys' future instead of the short-term goal. Initially, she didn't think much of his advice, but now his words have made a significant change in her coaching style. She is proud of all the athletes at MDC and thinks they will have a bright future even if the club shuts down. Soon, the competition begins with Ryuji. Despite being nervous, he executes a textbook dive and gets ranked on the leaderboard. Shabuki sticks to his dynamic style with a graceful finish, touching the heart of the audience. Unexpectedly, Tomoki executes an inward 3.5 to earn a hefty lead. With that performance from the boys, everyone expects to see great things from Yuichi. Unfortunately, his axis and body alignment is bent out of shape, forcing him to recover his dive with a high-level save. As the tournament progresses, Yuichi approaches Ryuji and tells him to do his best. Surprisingly, he feels a burning sensation from his hand, realizing Yuichi has a fever. While he tells Tomoki about his condition, Yuichi climbs the platform and starts feeling dizzy. Despite his fever, Yuichi stays silent about his health and continues to dive in the competition. However, his lack in performance shocks the world, making them question his resolve. In the meantime, as Ryuji and Tomoki think of what to do, Yuichi collapses due to his fever. They rush him to the infirmary to provide immediate first aid. However, Kyoko discovers that he has a high fever. Naturally, Shabuki feels guilty for taking Yuichi to Kobe. Tomoki feels as if he shouldn't have insisted on eating the meat bun. And lastly, Ryuji is pissed that he didn't stop him from practicing at the hotel pool. As usual, Yuichi tries to keep Ryuji from telling the truth about his practice. However, Kyoko forces it out of him. She lashes out on Yuichi for making a stupid move right before the competition. He was already exhausted from his special training and his body gave out. Initially, Yuichi listens to her blabber but eventually fights back. He blames Kyoko for being selfish for leaving them after the competition. He thinks she should stay and train them for their future careers. Before Kyoko can speak, Tomoki reminds her he hasn't seen the view she told him about. Unexpectedly, Shabuki also feels the same, saying she should not leave a man after igniting his fire for diving. Even Ryuji gets a few words in and asks her to continue to teach them. Once everyone is done blabbering, Kyoko reveals that she isn't going to leave them. She was talking with the American man regarding Shabuki's back. As things stand, he can't compete in major tournaments. However, there is a doctor in Florida known as Ben who has healed many injured athletes and helped them reach the top again. Additionally, the chairman of the federation has agreed to sponsor his treatment only if he can prove his worth in this competition. As she finishes, the officials call her back to the pool to resume the competition. Finally, Yuichi gets his battle mode on, assuring everyone he's fine to compete in the finals. With that said, the boys step back on the poolside to wait for their turn. Unexpectedly, Mu and Hiroya came to watch Tomoki win the competition. He acknowledges that his brother has trained like hell for this, which makes them want to root for him. The way he dives tells them that Tomoki is a different beast. While everyone is giving it their all, Ryuji remembers Ryu's advice to add a flair to his dives. He knows that Ryuji won't make it to the Olympics, hence he should use the opportunity to be adventurous. Right before the competition, Kyoko also gave him the same advice. Yet, he thinks that it's some miracle that he was able to reach the finals. Ryuji thinks that it is due to a jinx, but Matsuno ruins his big plan by stepping over his shadow. Seeing his idol in the flesh pushes Ryuji to awaken his inner talent and execute a textbook dive that shocks the audience. Even Yamada forgets about his rivalry with Yuichi and focuses on his dives. It is the first time ever that people have seen his raw talent surpassing everyone present in the competition. After a few rounds, Yuichi's fever gets the better of him. He can't find the energy to climb the stairs, let alone dive. However, deep down, Yuichi knows that the only way to win this match is by perfecting his special move. He can't take diving away from his father, nor can he let the club close down. Despite his burdens, his body starts to give out until Yamada arrives to give him a push. He wants Yuichi to dive before him, otherwise he will quit. For the first time, he has beaten Yuichi in the preliminary rounds, but his hunger is not satisfied. His words push to climb the platform while feeling like his legs might fall off. The sight of struggling to climb reminds Fujitani of himself. He recalls the day Yuichi first enrolled at MDC and developed an interest in diving, although he regrets telling him those odd things last night which lead him to such a state. As soon as Yuichi climbs the top, one of the swimming contestants makes a new Japanese world record. The entire stadium erupts with excitement and sings the national anthem. Naturally, Yuichi can't think straight with all the noise. He misses the sound of the first whistle, forcing the referee to give him a warning. Unexpectedly, Fujitani yells out loud, telling the entire stadium to stay silent while his son dives. At that moment, Yuichi feels a momentary thrill like never before, allowing him to execute his special move flawlessly. With that, he earns a total of 480 points and secures his spot in the Olympics. Next up, Shabuki decides to leave his mark on the hearts of everyone watching. He knew that Kyoko wanted to see his grandfather's swan dive, which is why she sent him the recording. He climbs the platform and without hesitation runs from behind to land a straight dive. He doesn't earn many points, but the chairman is reminded of the time when his grandfather shocked the crowd with that very dive. At last, Tomoki climbs the platform in hopes of executing a 4.5 dive. However, he feels his heart sink at the bottom of the sea. Yet, Kyoko and Yuichi's words of encouragement lift his confidence, allowing him to aim for the top once again. Unexpectedly, he executes the dive to perfection and earns a spot in the Olympics alongside Yuichi and Yamada. That's it for today, my fellow men of culture. Like and subscribe the channel for more plot-filled recaps.